What's up, guys? Today is such a fun in-person episode. Our guest is Lindsey Maestes. She is local here to Nashville, and I followed her for the last several years online and on her podcast, the Living Easy podcast, because her platform is everything marriage, intimacy, parenting. She's a writer, as I said, podcaster, and a coach. And so what she's done over the last close to decade is glean wisdom from people ahead of her in life, in marriage, in parenting, on all these topics, and then kind of be a voice, be a sounding board. She really opens up really vulnerably her entire life in those areas to us, simply so we're not alone, to invite us into her story and to share other people's stories of wisdom ahead of her. And what you get today is, quite honestly, a Q&A, selfishly from me, in the first year of my marriage, moving into becoming a mom this summer. And she talks to us all about why she does what she does, her story, her heart behind it. And what's really cool is she offers courses. Her two biggest are the Wife Project and the Sex and Intimacy Project. And this is where she really meets us on the ground level, wherever we are in our marriage, wherever we're wanting to grow, either individually as a wife or together as a couple. And she is so faithful, so funny, and everything she does is really practical resources and takeaways for us to make small steps toward great strides in our marriage and our relationships and as parents. So I had such a great time learning from her today. Her heart for this and her heart for people is so evident and so true. And if y'all do not follow Lindsey already, go follow her on Instagram. You're going to love our conversation today. Check it out, Lindsey Maestes. All right, y'all, I'm so excited. I was just saying before, I've followed Lindsey for a couple of years now, and just with the season of life that I've been in, coming into a new marriage and now becoming a mom.
Yes, congratulations,
thank
by
you.
the way.
I feel like this is a little bit of a selfish request. I'm just going to like gather everything I can from you in our time together. And I know everybody else will too. So I'm so excited to have you and have you in person. You're local to Nashville, Franklin, which is actually where I grew up. So
did you?
Yeah. More the Grassland side. I don't know what part Franklin's really big.
Yeah. We're like near Thompson Station.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of opposite, but God, it's peaceful out there.
It is. It's very calm. I love coming to Nashville. I love it so much. I love the food.
Yeah.
I love the shopping. I love just the vibe. It's so fun to me. I'm pretty adventurous, but then I love going back to the farmland and the calm.
Man, that's what I've always said. And I know I'm biased because I grew up here, but you really can have both. And I think, most cities are that way once you get outside sort of the epicenter, but you can have all the sort of metropolitan now stuff that you want, excitement, energy, and, cuisine. But man, it's still like,
it's magical.
It's still a sweet Southern place if you go a little bit outside. So I'm glad to hear that. How long have you been here?
We've been here 3 years this summer.
Awesome.
So, so it's been, we moved from Albuquerque. Let me start by saying thank you for having me.
Oh, gosh, of course. No, we just
thank you for having me. I'm so honored,
glad.
and it's so fun to wake up and come and do this. So we moved from Albuquerque, New Mexico. So desert, very different world.
Yeah.
And we left everything we had known. My husband and I were both born and raised there, had our entire families there. Yeah. And one day we both were just like, it doesn't feel like home anymore. We were ready for different, kind of like a transition for our family, just quality of life and, just a shift. So we've been here and we are so happy.
I'm so glad. The farthest I have ever driven, shout out to Lindsey Fulham, drove through Albuquerque. She was in Tucson and driving back through Nashville to Georgia. Her husband's in the military. He was gone. Volunteered as a very young woman to do it with her. And I will never drive that far again for what it's worth.
What is that,
but
like
Albuquerque's
20 hours?
Cool. Oh, it was, I think, 2 or 3 days. We really stretched it. So I feel like I'm a little spoiled. That's the longest I'll ever do. But that's a big change from Albuquerque, especially if that was home. But I'm glad y'all have loved it.
Thank
you. Part of the whole scene here is Music City, right? So I always like to ask, just for fun, when we start out the shows, is what would be your walkout song for life right now? Like, what would be a song that's indicative of how you're feeling and what's going on?
Oh my gosh.
Some people love it. Some people hate it,
No, I love music. Oh my gosh. The only thing that keeps coming to mind is Joy of My Life by Chris Stapleton.
Tiptoed in a room I know you got to have your rest.
And it's not real high energy, but I have just been in a season where I've really been choosing gratitude. And it's coming out of a season of struggling with like depression and anxiety and even getting to a point of suicidal thoughts, which I had never struggled with before. And recently it's shifted and I feel like God has just pulled me out. And so the way I view life feels different than before. I feel like I've met people and had the opportunity to experience things even since being here where I just see life with more color.
Oh, that's
and good. I see my boys with more color and my husband just like so much more, I don't know why I'm using this analogy, but vibrant. I'm not into art or anything, but
oh, girl, it's tracking. It's
it
awesome.
feels vibrant, and my gratitude is heavy and weighty in the best way. And so I guess that would be my answer.
Girl, that's awesome. First of all, big Stapleton fan. Second of all, like that's the show. That's the heart of the show. And what you said is just such, the heartbeat of what I hope people know when they're in the dark seasons or the valley seasons, like you're referring to. And it's just that, like, man, your well for joy is deeper on the other side, right? You said more colorful. I love that language. It makes me think of the Jamie Johnson song. You should have seen it in color. Do you know that song?
Oh, yes.
It's a little more nostalgic and sad, but beautiful song. But anyway, I'm so glad to hear that. And I want to talk all about what you do with Living Easy podcast. You're a writer, you're a podcaster. You mentioned wife, mom, you have 2 little boys. You're a marriage and intimacy coach. So as I said, I'm kind of like selfishly going to dive into all your
Please
expertise.
Do. It's fun.
But since you mentioned it, do you mind kind of taking a sec to speak to women who may be in a season like you just described that you went through? Just you've been so open on your platforms about the struggle with depression. And I think that was postpartum and, in the last several years, even though your boys are what?
8 and 6.
Yeah. And just for anybody in that spot, just make them feel less alone. Like give them a bite of hope for today. Would you mind?
No, not at all. Thank you for asking. I think what I would say is one of the best lessons I learned coming out of it is that you're not as much of a burden to people as you feel like you are. Because I think that I lived in that. So I'm a communicator. Like this is my jam. I love being with people. And when I was feeling that depression, it was like this physical response. That's kind of where it starts for me. So I wake up in the morning and I don't want to get out of bed. And my kids, I can hear them. And I have really been just heavily feeling like I missed so much of those early mornings with them because I couldn't get out of bed, that even on the days where I still feel it, I'm like, as soon as I get my feet on the ground, I'm better. And so that's one thing I've told people. If you struggle with that feeling of like, I felt as if it was like a 10,000 pound weighted blanket. It didn't even feel emotional to me. Like there was nothing I could pinpoint, nothing I could trigger. It was, I cannot physically move my body. All I want to do is sleep. And when I started Zoloft, which was an antidepressant medication, I didn't feel that anymore at all. It was not there at all. But I also stopped feeling a lot of things. And so that was a challenge. So that would be an encouragement, is to put your feet on the floor. Because once you get your feet on the floor, I just believe so strongly that the enemy can really get into your head if you're staying in bed and you're just feeling like, oh, this is all I'm going to do today. This is all I can do. It's all that I can do. But if you put your feet on the floor, I just feel like God can use that and say, okay, you can do that. And then you can move one more step and you can get out in there, even if you're overstimulated, overwhelmed. And so all that to say, I really would, because I felt so weighted and I felt so uncomfortable in my skin, and because I live my life encouraging people or like in ministry, that I felt like such a burden to everyone because I didn't even want to be around myself. Yeah. I felt just heavy all the time. But when I leaned into my people and I communicated to them and I really opened up about what I was feeling, it was so refreshing to just have them come alongside. And of course I would get in my head and I'm like, I don't want to talk about this nonstop because I need to do the work as well. But yeah, I guess my encouragement would be get your feet on the floor, talk to your people because they love you. Like they care about you. They want to know what's going on in your world and in your life. And having those people just checking in was probably one of the best things that I could have had.
I'm so thankful for you saying that. I know that feeling of being a burden just in the seasons that I've gone through. And I remember so specifically one of my very best friends saying, if the tables were turned, like, would you not do anything to just lighten my load a little bit? And I was like, well, shoot, of course I would, you know, and just to kind of reframe, like, you're not letting them love you if you're trying to like valiantly even hold it in kind of thing. The safe people, the right people, the good people.
Yeah. It's almost like you're stealing their blessing from being
Truly.
your support.
Truly.
Because you have likely been the support to those people many times and they want to be able to give back. But for people who are not used to asking for things, it feels so burdensome and like you're adding to the burden. Lastly, let me say, get in the sunshine. It's the best thing I've ever done for myself. I will sit in the outside, and in Nashville, it's not as easy as in Albuquerque. I'm like, come on, Lord. But I will go and I'll sit and I'll do my quiet time, or I'll just sit in the sun for 15 minutes to start my day, or go on a walk every morning. Yeah. So if you're feeling anxiety, depression, anything, just move your body and get in the sun, because it genuinely is probably the best thing that
I love that. I've heard you say that a lot. And even on the days when you can't walk, like you said, just sit. I mean, just the vitamin D.
Wrap in a blanket if it's freezing. Do whatever you have to do. And take vitamin D drops. I have all the tips now because I'm like, I've been suffering for a while. But I feel so much like I'm coming out of it. Yeah. And it ebbs and flows. And my husband has been so patient with me. My boys have been so patient with me. I'm very thankful. But I don't want to give up on it. You know, I don't want to stop fighting. So I'm doing all of the things, the exercising, the eating clean, the vitamin D that I can to stay on top of it for the sake of my family. Yeah,
that's so good. And truly for anyone in this boat, like, go follow Lindsey, because you are. You are so as I said before, spiritually grounded in all that you do and share and teach. But like, girl, you're practical. Like, you tell us what helps. And so please go follow her if you feel like you are in that place of, I can't even put my feet on the floor. And if I do, what do I do? It's so helpful. So thank you for speaking to that. And you mentioned your boys and you mentioned your husband, Jesse. So much of what you do in your work is around marriage and parenting and intimacy and everything that goes along with that. So just tell us a little bit of y'all's story. Like, I want to hear your kind of love story and background and everything.
That's so fun. I don't talk about this a lot. Oh, Jesse's the best. We've been married 12 years. Best friends for about 15 years. And I friend zoned him for a good 3 years. And he tried. He was persistent. He was so persistent. But he is, to this day, the best man I've ever met in my life. He is exactly who I hope my boys are to their wives. And I know not a lot of people can say that. And so I'm very thankful. He makes me want to be better. And I don't say that because I do marriage stuff. Like, we've had our messes, and you can hear all about it on my podcast. So our disaster years that we've had together. But when we were young, I was 19. I was just saved. Like, I had just been saved. And he and I met at a party I was not supposed to be at, and that he was not supposed to be at. And we both were essentially like stepping backwards in our faith and kind of making poor decisions. And it was so interesting because we met, and he was a friend of mine, was really good friends with him. And I went home, and I was so burdened. I was so burdened that I had been there, and I was so burdened. And it wasn't just that we were at a party. It was just the excessiveness of what we were doing. I went home, and I was so burdened by myself, but also I was burdened by him because I knew he was a pastor's kid. I knew he was with my good friend who I wanted to know the Lord. And so I had called my friend and repented, really everyone there. It was a big deal for me because I had walked away from that. Like, that was my lifestyle, was the party lifestyle. And then I went right back into it. And everyone's like, oh, Lindsey's back. Like, it didn't do, like, God didn't do what you thought he was going to do. And so I had to really own and swallow that. And I called every single person who was there and just said, this is not what God wants of my life, my friends. And so anyway, then I emailed Jesse, because at that time, I mean, I know text was probably a thing, but I emailed him. And I was like, hey, I know this is super off base, but I just want you to know that my friends mean so much to me, and I messed up being there. And I know that you know what I know. I know you know Jesus. I know you've experienced him. And I know that you know there's better for yourself, but also for them. And I just want to challenge and encourage you to like call them up and to kind of call you up as well. And I said, I'm not coming from a place of pride. I am on the floor. Like I screwed up. But I just care about them and love them. And he responded with, oh my gosh, I've never had someone challenge me. I'm so blown away. Like, do you want to go to dinner?
Yeah. You're like, wow, really
like,
not my intention to score a date, but bonus.
And I didn't. And we went to church. We went to college group as friends for about 3 years. And then there was just a moment God knocked me and Jesse asked for a date about 3 years in. And we went and we talked. We went to Texas Roadhouse and we talked for about 6 hours at the table. And then I called my mom. I was like, I'm going to marry him. And everyone had already been trying to convince me to marry him. So it worked out. It was good.
It wasn't a shock to anybody else.
No, And then we waited about 3 years, had our boys, and did a lot of like real estate flipping and stuff and just try to keep ourselves really busy. And
I love that.
Yeah.
I feel like I know him and your adoration, I really mean. Not even just like marital love, but like you adore him. And that's so evident and inspiring. And I pray all the time that maintains the way that I look at Connor. And so I love to see that. I feel like I know him. But at what point?
I should have brought him.
Yeah, please. We could do everybody at some point. At what point then did you fall into this work that you do in this space? Like at what point into y'all's marriage?
I had just had Sutton, my oldest, who is 8.5, and I was about 9 months in, and that's when the postpartum hit. And I was looking online for anything, like not just medical journals or something that would tell me what I was dealing with. I wanted to hear from somebody that I was not a horrible mother, like that they had felt it. And it's so much more widely discussed now and more prevalent. But then 8 years ago, it really wasn't. I couldn't find a lot. And so that was the first blog post I wrote was, I can't remember the title of it. I've always had it on the tip of my tongue. But essentially, if you've ever felt this as a mother, you're not alone. And I went into being afraid of putting Sutton in his car seat because I thought I was going to break his bones, or being hesitant to, like, if Jesse had to leave the next morning, I would dread it all night. I wouldn't let myself go to sleep. It was very bizarre behavior for me, but I internalized it as I'm a horrible mom. And so it was in that moment. I've always written. I got my degree in journalism and psychology, so I love people's minds. I love to write. I love words. And so it kind of flowed together. And so I started writing the blog, and the response was immense. It was really powerful. For me, it was healing. Because I was devastated sharing the information that I was feeling like, I want to have it all together. I want to be this mom who can cook the dinner and go, and I'm like here on the couch, please don't leave me, And so to have people respond with, oh, been there. Oh my gosh, I felt that. Oh my gosh, I've never talked about it, but I lived in that, was really freeing for me. And that's what kind of compelled this ministry that led more toward relationship, because that's what I value. Motherhood, marriage, friendship, relationship. And it kind of catapulted with some of the marriage content focused on the family, and then started picking things up like other digital magazines at the time. And so I'm also like a marketing mind. So I started thinking like, okay, this is being received really well, and I'm really passionate about it. And people really love Jesse. I always say he's way more like loved than I am when I post him. My views skyrocket. So I'm like, that. I'll take it. I'm going to use you.
Yeah, exactly.
But
I'm
then
sure
it
he
just
doesn't
kind
mind.
of no, he gets pretty shy. He's like, okay. But yeah, then it just grew from there, and I really grew to love talking about it. And I've always loved picking the brains of women older than me, men older than me, couples, to learn, what have you done that's worked? What have you done? What's your greatest regret? What are the areas where you want to be better? And then kind of just soaking that in for myself in my marriage, utilizing it, seeing what works, and then speaking it out for other people to use as well.
Can you speak to people who have, maybe they're feeling that stirring, right? Like there's a message that isn't out there for them, or something that they need to feel like they need to vulnerably speak, but maybe are hesitant because they don't have the experience. Like they're hesitant because they're young. And I ask that because it sounds to me like you just kind of spoke your heart in real time and then gleaned wisdom from others as you learned and built. And And I know that when I started writing my book, I felt so affirmed in the Lord that like, this story is about me. Like, you need to tell the story. Like, every time I would pray and question, his message would be, tell the truth about your story and tell the truth about who I am. And that's all I'm asking of you.
love that.
But there was always this like imposter thing that I had to fight and fight and fight because you're young. And honestly, I'm going this weekend to speak at a widows conference with this group that I adore and will always be a part of. And even now, I've done it 3 years. And it's like, when I walk up there, I think, I was only married a year. Like, who am I to speak to all these women that were married 15, 20, 45 years? You know what I'm saying? And so I wonder if that was a thing you had to fight. And if it was, like, pump up these people that, man, it's just your story that matters.
Yes. Well, that's all I was going to say is your story matters. It doesn't matter how long you've experienced it. And I've received kickback on certain things where people, even on podcast episodes, I had one and I love them. But at the beginning, she was like, or at the end of the conversation, she was like, I have to be honest. Before we talked, I said, who is this girl to tell me how to do marriage? I've been married longer than her. And she said, but I'm eating my words now. And it's not because of what I'm saying. It's because I'm not only gleaning from my life. I'm gleaning from so many people where I love to receive stories and hold on to stories and then share those stories. But also, yes to imposter syndrome. I live it every single day, all the time. I am really big on...
It's awful.
It is. It's horrible.
It's so common, though.
But you don't have any chance of success. You have 0% chance of success if you don't take 100% risk. And that's where I live in my brain. I don't want to live my life regretting what I wish I would have tried. And so my family defines me as like a jumper. Like, I jump into things head first. I am diving, eyes closed, and you just kind of see what comes. And I will say that is not my personality to do that, because everything in me is fearful, terrified of failure, terrified of what people think of me, like people-pleasing tendencies. So this is the antithesis of what I actually want to do. But I think that's how I know that God is calling me to it. And I think that would be my word to people who are feeling like, I have a calling, I have something to say. I know that God has given me this gift, this passion. And especially if it's been affirmed by other people.
Absolutely.
I think that's really important. But to come to a place where you say, it isn't about me. It isn't about my outcome, what people think, or how successful it is. It's just the actual act of doing the thing that I'm called to do. And that is where mine is like next step forward. And probably you for your book as well. Like, I am not an expert. I don't have a PhD in this. But what I do have is a lot of experience and a lot of relationships I love, where I glean wisdom and then I hold on to it and I share it. And so I think that you can live that way. You're never going to be better than that one person because you're not even trying to get there. So if you see this person, oh my gosh, they've already succeeded in writing a book and becoming a New York Times bestseller, I'll never get there. You have absolutely no idea unless you try. So for me, I think that's what battles the imposter syndrome for me, is like, I so desperately want to live well for God's glory. And I feel that he calls me up to trust him, to have that faith, not faith in myself, because what am I? Nothing. I am nothing. But in his name, in his glory, in his design for me, I have so much value because of who he is. And so when I take myself out of the picture a little bit, and I think, how am I loving people? How am I no longer looking in the mirror, but looking at my neighbors, like through my neighbor's window, so to speak, not in a creepy way, but you know what I mean? What are they walking through? How can I love them, serve them? What are they needing? It just takes my eyes off of myself.
Yeah, that's so good. Like, how is what God's calling me to, letting them be seen more than how are they seeing me, kind of thing.
Amen.
That's so good. So yeah, a lot of what you do is super transparent, honest, vulnerable, for all the reasons we've talked about. And obviously those properties, those characteristics, those honest and vulnerable interactions are the soil that, you know, a really intimate marriage grows in, right? You have to bring down the walls. And so I just want to kind of know, like, was that a struggle for you? Speak to people who maybe don't know how to honestly and vulnerably express what they need to their partner, they're afraid to for whatever reasons they're carrying into their relationship. Like, how do we kind of start bridging the gap of fully seen, fully loved is a concept we talk a lot about.
Yeah. Oh gosh. It's a big question because our childhood, like as individuals, is so impactful in the way that we communicate with our partner. And I think the goal for me, and it's always, this is how I live my life, and especially recently, is at the end of my life, am I going to be proud of the way that I lived my life? But equally, when I wake up in the morning, by the way that I spend my day, am I going to be proud of the way I spent this day? And if I think in that way, even with my relationship, if I think that way with my children, am I, by the time they're 20, am I going to be proud of the way I communicated with my husband in front of my children so that they can effectively communicate with their spouse? It's kind of just eternal mindset is everything for me because it keeps me grounded in what matters, but also the end of my life. And so I think living that way has been beneficial. And I would just challenge people to say and encourage that even if you were raised in a home that didn't communicate. I was raised in a home where communication was a mess. It was either like, I was raised in 2 homes, divorce homes. One was very quiet, very quiet. We kind of keep things within the 4 walls of our home. We don't talk about things with other people. We don't really talk about things with ourselves. It gets brushed under the rug. And that's just what that parent was taught. The other parent was a loose cannon. Yeah. And so like full
mixed
blown
messaging.
Yeah, it was. And I came out somewhere in the middle of that, which has not been the healthiest. And I've had to work through a lot of issues. So, but I think that one really big thing is to overcome that is to make a decision to do so. You have to say, I am not my past. I'm not the way that I was raised. Yes, that's a part of my story, but I am responsible now for how I respond to things. I am responsible for the way that I communicate with my partner. I'm responsible for doing the work and calling. And that's a big part of Living Easy and the Wife Project and the Sex and Intimacy Project is challenging people to not just sit complacent in a complacent place and say, this is just who I am.
This is how it is.
Because that's not. There's so much sanctification. There's so much growth. There's so much grace. And you can move forward. And so practically, I would say, 1, remember that shame has no place in your marriage. You have become one. You are in a place where God is saying, I am giving you safety in your partner. And if your partner is not a safe person, that is where counseling or intervention needs to come in. I'm speaking to a safe, healthy marriage that the enemy loses his power when your shame is in the light and God then takes over. And so the things I talk about sexual assault when I was 14 and kind of sleeping around from 14 to 19 when I was saved because I had no value in myself. And I was really embarrassed to bring that to Jesse, pastor's kid. Turns out he had plenty of stories of his own. So I didn't live in that shame. But we both had to come to a place of redemption over what we had experienced and allowing God to be a part of sex and intimacy in our marriage. And that comes from talking about it, not giving details and all those things, but me sharing, hey, I feel really embarrassed by this in my past. I feel really ashamed. And he can share his side of things. Or I feel really intimidated that like you've seen someone else. And with Christianity, and I shake my head because it's just a part of Christianity that is not biblical. It is just part of the church and the culture that where we say sex is dirty and gross, do it with the person you love. And then you get to the person you love and the mindset of sex is dirty and gross is ingrained in your mind. And so talking about it with your partner, talking about what they like, talking about things that make them uncomfortable, things that they want to try. These are all really good things. And I bring this up because it is probably the biggest issue that I get in my comments and my DMs and is sex. It's either one is interested, one is not. Men tend to be very disinterested in sex a lot of the time. Women don't realize
hear
that. You don't hear that. It is common.
Yeah.
It's very common. Equally, women are overstimulated. They don't feel like they have a partner in the home, and so they don't want to give themselves. They don't have anything left to give in the bedroom. But a lot of this comes from a lack of communication of what the other person is feeling. And so I think that it is going in to say, okay, God has me. He's over this relationship. He's over this marriage. He loves us. And I'm not going to let the enemy in because the longer you wait, the further you kind of stay away from the intimacy, and especially, having children is a huge part of that, to where you have to give yourself grace to kind of get your body, you're overtouched, overstimulated. You are nursing. You feel like a moo cow. That's what I always said. I'm like, I feel like a moo cow.
A vending machine. I always called my girlfriends. I was like, God bless you. Like, you're a vending machine right now.
As soon as you're needed. And then by the end of the night, you do not want anyone to touch you. And I think there is space for that. But I think during that time, and I don't know why I feel compelled to speak to this, maybe just it's the season, but during that time, there are things you can do for him. And that can feel very hard for some women because they're like, I'm already giving so much of myself. Why am I going to give to my partner? But what I've really, really felt in the past few years is the 100-100 mindset is the only way to go. You can't do 50%, 50%. I give 50, they give 50, because it really becomes this self-serving perspective. Whereas Jesus says to serve as he has served, to love as he has loved, which is endlessly. It is unconditionally. Again, not referencing abuse, not referencing, tendencies, toxic behaviors. But in a healthy relationship, serving your partner, if intimacy and physical touch is important to them, often is returned and reciprocated in emotional love. Like, it is a sense of connection. So I think it's that. And that breeds communication. It breeds emotional intimacy. The physical intimacy breeds emotional intimacy, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So when you foster that, it's very important. Also, last answer, I know this is very lengthy, but one thing would be communication cards, like conversation
I love this.
cards.
Talk about this. These are in your courses.
Yes.
Yeah.
So conversation cards, I'm actually working on some right now. I'm almost finished with my own version, and I'm so excited. So, but essentially, and I'm not pitching anything because they're not ready yet, but just going to like a game where they already have pre-made questions for you. And in the Wife Project, I do have 15 questions to ask one another monthly. But they're fun. Like, if you were a taco, what kind would you be? Or like if you were a Mexican food, what kind would you be? Or if you had to choose a favorite member of your family, who would you choose? And it just creates conversations that maybe things you wouldn't normally ask. But then it gets into things like, what are 3 things I did that made you feel really loved this week? Or what is something sexual that you've always wanted to try, but you're afraid to ask me to try? So it prompts conversations that feel uncomfortable, and you can like hide behind because it's not your question.
You're not coming up with it.
You're not coming up with it, but you can still get an answer. And it's just a very practical, like tactical way, I think, to kind of break into that realm in your relationship.
I think that's so good. And that's why I love that you have the different courses, because as we've said, you give people the tools to take these seemingly small steps that really can accomplish big changes in your communication and your honesty and your vulnerability. And so just give us sort of the rundown of what you offer right now, just since we're here, so people know. You mentioned the Sex and Intimacy Project.
Yeah, so the Sex and Intimacy Project was recorded with Jesse and myself, and that took some like teeth pulling. He was not the most comfortable. I'm like such an open book, and for him, he's very private and personal, but he similarly sees the people and the needs. So he sat down with me, and it's about a 4.5 week course, talking about lots of things. I mean, we get into nitty gritty. We get into all the anatomical names because we shouldn't be ashamed of them. But even more so, it's not just like sex. We talk deeply about spiritual intimacy, leadership in the home, just spiritual connection, and showing your children what that looks like in the home. Talk about conversation, communication, healthful ways of being partners so that you're not feeling so burdened in the bedroom. And again, it's such a common issue. So we really dive into things. We dive into postpartum. We dive into being ashamed or embarrassed of your body, and just what the Bible says about all of it. So it's all biblically founded.
That's why I love it.
Yeah, thank you. And we have a workbook, a his and hers workbook. We even have a sheet that you can laminate and hang up in your closet or wherever, hidden from other people, where you can say, like, you can rate yourself of how intimate you're feeling that day. So when you wake up in the morning, use a little dry erase marker and mark it off. And it's for the shy people who don't like to kind of pursue or send sexy text messages. It's a way of being like, hey, I'm kind of in the mood. I just need a little pursuit. Yeah. And then we have the Wife Project. My heart and soul is the Wife Project. I love it so much. It is an 8.5 week video course where I teach biblical principles, but very practical examples, along with a 65 page workbook. And the goal of that is not, people are like, what about the husband project? Absolutely, but I'm a wife, right? Like that's where I can speak to. And the things that I've learned, the things I've gleaned, I wanted to share. And it's intended to deepen your faith in such a way that it pours out and onto your marriage. And so it challenges, it talks about betrayal, forgiveness, pornography. Like Jesse and I dealt with struggles with his pornography early on in our relationship and how that impacted my trust and my vulnerability and like insecurities and how to navigate it biblically. I talk about being a crown versus a thorn in your marriage. So kind of nagging and deadening the relationship. I talk about contempt and bitterness and working through those things, but more so in a way that it's like, we are not walking into heaven holding our husband's hand. This is on us. Like our relationship with Jesus is on us. And the way that we view marriage, the way that we live in marriage is our responsibility. Yes, they are part of that. And yes, they have a responsibility, but we cannot fix them. So essentially the foundation is God calls us to be a love him wife and not a fix him wife. And as women, at least I can speak for myself, I tend to try to fix and help and make things better. And have learned over the years that I want to really lean into what I feel, like what I can control and the faith that I am responsible for, and that the rest I have found flows over onto Jesse, and I see the impact that it makes. So those are my babies. I also have the Modern Proverbs 31 Woman Project, and that's just like a little baby project about living like as a faithful, godly woman.
Can I read? There's a portion from the Wife Project that I found on your Instagram or somewhere that I want to read because I feel like this could really hit home for a lot of women who may be sitting here hearing us talk and think like, man, like my husband just he's not in a Jesse place, And what does that mean for us? Like, what can I do? And you pulled an excerpt from there that says, whether your husband fails to spiritually lead, if he isn't a partner in your home, when he falls short of expectations, or if his mood shifts sporadically, you can still experience true contentment in your life. Are you fighting for it? And I think my heart goes out because not even to just point blame at a specific partner, it could just be a specific season that they're in, right? Where they don't maybe have this same fervor to live a biblical marriage, the same fervor to this scripture I love keeps coming to mind as you're talking, outdo one another in showing love. It's in Romans. Because obviously that's how we want to live, but that's not always how we act and how we behave and what our circumstances are sort of, I don't know, how they're allowing us to act. And so for women who kind of feel like, I want to fight for this, I want to do that, but it feels like a one-way street. Like, is that part of the big heart behind the Wife Project? Is that why it's about us and not about him?
Yes. And I will say I speak to those women so much because I have so many of those women in my life that their husband is really struggling to be present, or maybe not even struggling. They're just not present, or they're sneaky, or they have secrets, or they've betrayed them. And it's a very, very real thing in our world, especially now with social media and the accessibility. And it feels very defeating to women because they don't want the implications of divorce. They want to live out a godly marriage. They want to succeed in that. But they feel like they're fighting against a brick wall, essentially.
Yeah.
And yes, so that is the premise of the Wife Project, because one thing I've really realized and believe is that you can live a joyful, abundant, godly life even if your marriage is not thriving. And I say this because when our marriage becomes our all in all and our idol, essentially, like it becomes our God, it dictates our joy, it dictates our peace, it dictates our happiness, everything, then everything else around us feels like it's crumbling. And I did that with Jesse for the first 5 years of our marriage. He would look at pornography. I wanted to die. I felt like my world was shattered because I felt like I wasn't enough. Yeah. It was to me vocalizing like, you are not providing enough for me. I want something else.
Yeah.
And he's very open about all this. That's why I talk about it. But I struggled so much, and he would be secretive and he would lie about it. And so just to say, we do not have a perfect marriage, guys. It's not, I can speak to these things because we've walked through the trenches in a lot of areas. But I also would challenge that men need men. Men can hear the same advice from their wife that they hear from a man 10 minutes later, and they hear that man loudly and clearly.
I'm laughing because you're so right. That is where this laughter is coming from. Yes, proceed.
And so you feel like you do know the truth. And Jesse would joke, I do the same thing. Like I'll come home and be like, oh my gosh, my friend told me this today. He's like, yeah, I have to do that 20 times. But I'm glad you're hearing her.
It landed. Yeah.
So, but a big piece of this is building your life not solely around your spouse. And because I idolized him so heavily and I realized how quickly my world would crumble if he did something wrong or if he hurt me or if he didn't love me or love me in the way I wanted to be loved, that I was placing my hope and my peace and my joy in the wrong place. So I really, really had to do the work, Maddie. Like I had to fight hard to get to a place where I was not in my bed, couldn't get out of bed because my husband had done something that hurt me. And I say that because now my life is so different. Now I've built a life. I've built a faith that is unshakable by doing the work, by spending that time with Jesus every day, by committing myself. And in the moments when I don't want to, like still just, God, I'm broken. Just help, just pleading.
Yeah.
But also building friendships and building a business and living this really sweet, beautiful life of motherhood that I pour into my boys, that where now marriage is where it's supposed to be, which is a piece of my life. And some people have a really hard time hearing that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because they place it as their God, and it's not meant to be our God. Is it a pivotal part of my life? Absolutely. Is it above? It's God, my marriage, my children, my ministry. And that is what we do. That's how we live it out. But sometimes if the marriage is rocky and it's shaking, I am still able to find the joy in the other things of my life. And I think as you build that beautiful, abundant, like those relationships that pour in, they are then able to pour into your marriage. And so with the men who are struggling, having couples that you've built those relationships with come in and be like, hey, how's your marriage? Like Jesse and I will sit down at a dinner table with friends. We'll go out to Nashville. And that's like, how's marriage? How's life? Are you struggling? We don't do surface level.
Yeah.
And our friends, our friends know that's who we are. And it just gets into real conversation. And then those husbands can speak to the husbands. And it doesn't have to be, which I'm such a proponent of counseling, therapy. Love it.
Absolutely.
It's saved my life. But some men are really stubborn when it comes to that and unwilling. And so my encouragement would be just have people, mentors, someone you can trust, but don't be afraid to be like, hey, we're struggling. I actually this is an example because it was so powerful to me. There was this couple we hadn't seen in probably 6 months, and they invited us to dinner, and we went, and we were expecting like this fun night. And I say that because it didn't matter to us at all that what happened. And they sat down and she said, hey, I think my husband has been having an affair. And he had no idea she was going to talk to us about that.
Oh, wow.
But their marriage was in shambles, and he had refused for 6 months to up to a year to talk about those things. And so she had no other choice. And it turned into, we had dinner, and then we ended up going back to our house and talking for hours and hours and hours. And he was angry. He was upset.
Yeah.
But by the end of the conversation, the last thing he said, he was like, thank you guys so much. Like, I feel so free. And
wow.
That for me was, and I encourage women, that for me was, it just brought me a sense of freedom and hope for him and for them, but also just a different way of approaching people to say, don't shelter your marriage so much because your spouse is afraid of the outcome. If your marriage is in shambles enough where divorce is an option, or you're considering, like, take every opportunity to fix it. And sometimes that means outing the thing that they're most ashamed of or afraid of in order to find the healing. And you want to respect your spouse. You want to honor your spouse. But when it comes to a place where everything is falling apart, there's only so much that you can do at that point. And sometimes that means just confessing and talking about the hard thing.
Yeah. I know some people needed to hear that, so I'm really grateful for you sharing that. You mentioned, and this is a topic that I wanted to hit on with you, and it's probably where we'll end because, like I said, I could selfishly go on.
I get talk. I'm like, I need to let you talk. I'm sorry. I get
not
passionate.
at all. That's why you're here. They hear me talk enough. You mentioned kind of the hierarchy, right, of your priorities being God, your marriage, your kids, your work. This is so personal to me because I one of the most concrete and profound memories I have with my dad, who is a man of few words. The words are always powerful. They are either profound or hilarious, you know, but they are few. I'll never forget, we went on like just a little trip when I was, I don't know, sophomore, junior in college, whatever, because, you know, you get out of school so much earlier. My younger sisters were still in school. He and I went to Florida. He went fishing. I sat on the beach, whatever. And one night I remember sitting there just listening to music or whatever we were doing, and him saying, and I was 19, and he and my mom, you know, it's kind of a generation, like they have their marriage. They were always modeling love better than just about anyone I've seen. But they didn't talk to us about those things a lot. I think just generational. And he said at some point, I want you to remember that kids, like, y'all are the greatest blessing in my life. But you cannot put your future husband above your kids. And at that point at 19, you're like, okay, whatever. Like, he's had one too many cocktails. Like, why is he sharing this with me? And it was so profound. And it has stuck with me, gosh, 15 years later. And just you mentioning that makes me want to hear from you. How did you get those priorities in order? Why is that not the norm? I don't think that's the norm. And why is it not selfish as a mom to put, obviously God should be at the top for everyone. I think we can agree.
Yeah.
But why is it not selfish, and why is it crucial to sort of keep your spouse not above, but you know what I'm trying to say, you know, your kids.
Real quick, I think you said, and I'm making sure you said it right, that your dad said, don't put your future husband above your kids.
Sorry, I said it backwards. Okay.
I was just making, because I was like,
don't put your kids above your husband.
Okay. Yes, and I was just checking. I'm like, if
no,
he said
thank you for correcting.
That's okay.
It was
I just didn't know if I was combating.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. No.
Yes. Well, and I think your dad is wise, because I guess for me, growing up in a divorced home, I saw a lot of the division that came with not having a healthy relationship. And I've kind of felt that weight as I've grown up, just the kind of feeling torn between parents and all of that. That when I first got engaged to Jesse, that was one of the first things I told people was, we're not going to get divorced. It was this fear. It was so ingrained in me. And I'm like, I should be celebrating, but I'm like, I know I'm young, but I'm not getting divorced. Like, it was just, I was so fearful. And as we've grown together, I think with the children, we love our time together. And the reason that we're able to love our time together is because we take time apart together. And I've seen that when life becomes responsibilities, children, focus, we love them. We love being around them. We love being a family. We love doing Mario Kart nights and game nights. And we go play pickleball at the courts and do things as a family. And we love it. But there's a small disconnect still when you're navigating difficulties with kids, when you're getting their snacks, when they're thirsty, when you're reprimanding, when you're encouraging, that you're not fully connecting with your spouse. And in that, I see that we start to deteriorate a little bit, and then our family order starts to deteriorate a little bit. And when our communication is out of line, our children feel that. They're like, oh, wait, but mom said, but dad said, but dad seems frustrated. Mom seems frustrated. All that to say, the whole weight of our marriage is felt by the children. And when our marriage is in a healthy place, that pours down onto the children. And they see what communication should look like in the home. They see what they want, how they want to communicate to their spouse. Jesse and I disagree in front of our boys all the time. We don't fight. We don't yell. We don't cuss. We don't anything. Which if some people do, just challenge yourself to be better, because you don't want your children to grow up and to live that way. But as we see the health of the communication, the boys will ask, like, why are you guys fighting? Why are you arguing? And we'll say, we're not fighting, we're disagreeing, and you're going to have a relationship where you disagree. But mom and dad put one another first, and we value one another's feelings and emotions. And so we're going to talk about this, and we're going to find a resolution. And you guys will see us resolve. If the boys see us disagree, they're going to see the resolution as well. But they are the reason that my priorities are that way. And it's, people think that if my kids are my priority, then they get everything. But the problem is empty nest syndrome. Your children will leave one day, if they become the idol, just as my husband shouldn't be my idol, my children also shouldn't be my idol. If when they leave, empty nest syndrome is that couples get divorced so commonly once the children leave for college, and they stayed together essentially for the child. But then that child is now 20 years old, and they're going to feel the gravity of that divorce. They've only known their parents together this amount of time. And this is not to shame anyone who has walked through this. It's to encourage those who are walking toward that season to say you have to value one another, because one day your children are going to be married and they're going to separate. And if your life is revolved around them, we see those mothers-in-law that we don't want to be, who idolize their children so much that they're unwilling to let go, and then it damages the marriage. So it's God-ordained order, essentially. He calls us, that is the only relationship in Scripture where we're called to love like Christ loves the church. We're not called to love our children like Christ loves the church, though we do naturally because we've been given that instinct. But that the flow of the relationship is so important, because if I'm receiving the unconditional love of God and the grace of God and the mercy of God, I can then pour that into my marriage. And then when my marriage is healthy, thriving, focused on Jesus, that then pours into my children. And our home, while fully chaotic with two very high energy boys, where I'm like, Lord, you're sanctifying me every day, it is one where we are constantly pointing back to the Lord and to one another. It's a fight too. It's not easy to, but we are. And when they see us kissing in the living room, you know, like hugging or kissing, I don't come from a PDA household, and neither does Jesse, but they smile and they're like, oh, and then they run up and they hug us and they love, and they're like,
awesome.
Mom. But you see the joy in them because that is their example of love in a home. And so I think for ministry purposes, like a healthy marriage is solid. I think for ministry to your children purposes, a healthy marriage it's all God glorifying. Yeah. And so it's when the flow is right, it honors Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. You give us such a waterfall picture of how it works. Just for people who are like, oh man, our priorities have gotten way out of order. I want my marriage to be number one. What's like one step for them that you can offer?
Date nights.
Yeah.
Jesse and I just went on a date night for our anniversary, and it was like one of the best days ever. We had so much fun. Do creative and fun things. And those cards, like date cards and stuff, are also a great way to do that, because they can give you ideas. The Wife Project, I have, I don't even know how many, but tons of date card ideas. And I tell you to put them on popsicle sticks and then just pull one out. Because it gets you out of your bubble, like your comfort zone. Netflix and chill's great until like you've Netflix and chilled so much that you're
for
like
5 years. Yeah.
You're just scrolling through shows and you go to bed. It's not a way to live. So let me give like practical tips. One, date nights weekly. This does not have to be expensive. It can be at home. Put a blanket on your floor and make a picnic. Go outside and look at the stars and talk, have conversations, use the conversation cards. Go together and grab a coffee when your child is napping. A lot of the pushback I get is we don't have a village. And we moved here without any family friends. We've had people move since, but we had to get creative. And sometimes that was sitting on the front porch. We now take walks weekly, which is like the best thing, because it just prompts conversation in ways you wouldn't think. And that's usually when the boys are at school. But find ways. Your children can be asleep for this. Your children, you also don't want to have a child-centered home, so they need to give you space as well and to have that. And you're giving them so much connection time that when you ask for 25 minutes for them to play quietly with toys or in their room, is maybe not in their room if you feel like that's isolating to them, but you know, where some people do independently, that you can have that time to just sit in the backyard and talk or do whatever gives you that connection time, because you'll find that the rest of your week will be so much more joyful, so much more smooth, even if the conversations are hard, that you at least feel connected. So one, date regularly. Two, I would say side-by-side activities. As women, we really like the face-to-face like this, conversations, coffee shops, talking, and that's great occasionally with your spouse. But it's very likely that your husband thrives more with side-by-side activities. Yeah. My husband's is pickleball. I actually almost wore my pickleball shirt today.
Yeah,
I don't know what the vibe is going to be.
I love it.
So we play pickleball, or we will just, I mean, like I said, we'll walk around, or he plays video games occasionally, and I'll sit and attempt to play with him, and I hate it. I hate it. I don't love it, but I do love the environment in which because he's like, "You're so cute. Look at you with your headphones on." I'm like, I hate this. But we're pretending to thrive, and it's because it's what he likes, and he'll come shopping with me or do the things I like to do, and it's just that side-by-side compromise. Yeah. Where if you hate working on a car, go do it anyway. If you hate working out, go do it anyway. I'm really big on, I guess I'll say number 3, leveling up together. Do things that are hard together. Work out and exercise and challenge yourselves to be better versions of yourselves. Sit down and do a budget. Have hard conversations about money, about investing. Go and read a hard book together, like a challenging book or just a book together. Do things that make you better together. And I actually posted this on Reels recently where I essentially said, if you would get a revenge body if you got a divorce, but you're not fighting for health, and it doesn't mean revenge body, I just mean physical health, mental health. If you're not trying to be the best version of yourself right now in your marriage, your priorities are out of line. Why would you do that for somebody that you're going to date temporarily or potentially that could be for a moment versus the person that you've committed your life to? And this isn't to say like it's all about vanity, not in any way. It's about caring for yourself so much because then when you do care for your body and your mind, you feel better. You feel mentally better. You're a better version of yourself for your partner. And that's what they deserve. And that's what you deserve from them. And when you do it together, it's really, really great. Lastly, I would say if you just feel like, oh my gosh, we're a mess and we just don't even know how to get out of this, talk to somebody. I hope and pray you have like a home church and if you don't, go to one, like just go in on a Sunday. There's nothing stopping you. Walk on in and talk to somebody and ask for Christian counseling or therapy or help or ask to speak to an older couple and just have the conversation. Go to a friend and say you're struggling. Just allow yourself to get to that place. There are so many resources now as well with podcasts and books. And you really have the world at your fingertips. A lot of that is just choosing to make a change and a difference in your home.
Yeah, I think a lot of all these suggestions, everything you talk about in your courses and on your podcasts and everything is, from my perspective, trying to shift that mindset of, okay, if I'm needing these resources, if I'm needing to go into a church and ask for help, then like we're on the way out. Like this is too broken. When in reality, if you're doing that, you're starting the fight. Like you're starting to do the work to reprioritize, to do it God's way if you haven't been thus far, to build the trust, to then be honest, then be vulnerable. And so it's like, that's the strongest action you can take. It's not one of weakness. It's one of strength. And so I just appreciate all that you do. And y'all, I'm telling you, the Wife Project, Sex and Intimacy Project, Proverbs 31, you said, is available. Yeah. Is there anything else coming up or coming out that you want to make sure people know about?
Yeah, I guess we'll say the relationship cards. This can be my accountability. This is the jumping in head first, guys, that I talked about earlier. Yeah. Where it's not quite done yet, but when you speak it out, you have to do it. So yeah, those will be available soon on my website and on Instagram. And then the podcast, Living Easy Podcast. It's been such a joy. I've been doing it for quite a few years now, and love the conversations. So scroll through. There's a topic for everything that you can find. So we actually just had one on thoughts of suicide and depression, and then we had some on just like morning routines. So I'm kind of all over the place. But yeah, that was it. But I just adore you. I think you're great. I think you're so fun.
We've had fun. Yeah, I knew
so
we
nice.
would.
I appreciate you.
I'm so grateful for everybody to get to know you.
Thank you.
So tell us something right now, Lindsey, that is bringing you joy. That's how we always like to close.
Oh my gosh. I would say the spring, the trees coming back. I love green coming from the desert. Yeah, I soak it up. And so I'm somebody who I kind of romanticize my life. Like I look for good things. And so I'll go out driving. And now that I'm going out driving and things are turning green, I find myself, I'm just so happy. I'll just turn on good music and I'll go drive for like 25 minutes and get myself a Starbucks and just like choose to enjoy the day. And again, that's because there were moments I wasn't enjoying anything. And so I fight for that joy. And I just feel like God is, by giving the greenery, I'm like, oh, you're just adding to it. It's so beautiful. So yeah, I think it's just the simple things. Like I agree. Just finding joy in simplicity.
I love that. I agree with that. That is the perfect send-off, joy and simplicity. And I sense that from you in all the hard you've been through, all the good you fought for, and you make us see that that's possible in every season. So I'm so thankful for you. Y'all go follow Lindsey, Living Easy Podcast, all the courses. I promise you, there is nothing you're not sitting there wondering about that she hasn't hit on. Like, as a personal fan and consumer and friend for a couple of years now, I can assure you that's true. So go check her out. She'll speak truth and encouragement into wherever you're at. So appreciate it, girl.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Thanks, guys.